The Titanic was known as a ship that couldn't sink and impressed everyone with its amazing design and luxury. But sadly, even though it was magnificent and people trusted it completely, the Titanic had a terrible fate on its very first journey. This story will explore all the important details about how the ship was built, what happened on its doomed voyage, and the significant impact it had on history. It changed people's beliefs about invincible things and made them realize that even the mightiest creations can face tragedy. The Titanic was an incredible engineering achievement. It was built with new and advanced designs and technology. The ship was really big, stretching over 882 feet long and having 9 floors. It was very strong and could easily sail across the Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic offered luxurious things that were better than anything else. The first-class rooms were elegant and fancy, with beautiful bedrooms, fancy dining rooms, a special room for smoking, and even a Turkish bath. The second-class rooms were also nice and looked like the fancy rooms on other ships. The third-class passengers had simpler rooms, but they were still good and provided a place for immigrants to start a new life in America. The people who made the ship were very confident in their work and believed that the Titanic could never sink. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic started its first ever trip from Southampton, England. Many people came to see the ship off as it began its journey across the ocean. There were different kinds of passengers on board, from very rich and important people to immigrants who wanted a better life in America. The Titanic stopped at Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, where more passengers got on the ship. The atmosphere on the Titanic was full of excitement. First-class passengers experienced the most luxurious and fancy things. Second-class passengers had a comfortable trip, and third-class passengers were happy and hopeful in their simpler accommodations. As the Titanic sailed further into the North Atlantic, something terrible happened on the night of April 14, 1912. The ship was going very fast, trying to make news headlines and break the record for the fastest trip across the ocean. Even though they received many warnings about icebergs in the area, the crew believed so strongly that the Titanic couldn't sink that they didn't worry too much. Around 11:40 p.m., someone looking out for icebergs saw one right in. The crew quickly tried to steer the ship away from the iceberg, but it scraped along the right side of the ship, making holes that would lead to a big problem. At first, some people didn't think it was a big deal, but soon they realized that the supposedly unsinkable ship was in serious trouble. People started to panic when they realized how much damage the ship had suffered. The crew tried to get everyone to safety, but it was very chaotic. They started putting the lifeboats into the freezing water, even though they could only hold a small number of people. Because they weren't ready for an emergency like this, everything became even more desperate. People were confused, everything was disorderly, and there were very difficult choices to make. Women and children were given the first chance to get on the lifeboats, while many men had to stay behind. It was a heartbreaking situation. The whole tragedy was really sad as the once beautiful Titanic sank deeper and deeper into the cold, dark ocean. The Titanic sent out messages asking for help, and other ships, like the RMS Carpathia, heard them and came to rescue the people who were still alive. It was early in the morning on April 15, 1912, when the Carpathia arrived at the place where the Titanic had sunk. The Carpathia picked up the survivors. But it was a sad sight because there were also many people who didn't make it and their bodies were still in the freezing water. Families and communities were heartbroken, feeling very sad about the loss of their loved ones. It was a terrible tragedy because the Titanic was supposed to be a journey of hope and new beginnings. Afterward, there were investigations and inquiries to find out why it happened and who was responsible for the lives lost. The sinking of the Titanic changed the way ships are made and how people travel on the sea. They made important changes to keep everyone safe. They made rules about how many lifeboats a ship should have to make sure everyone can get on one if there is an emergency. They also decided that someone should always be listening to the radio in case they receive messages for help. They took warnings about icebergs more seriously and found better ways to navigate through them. Even though many lives were lost, people still wanted to know more about the Titanic. They wrote books, made movies, and documentaries to tell the story of what happened, and share the experiences of the people who were on the ship. People built memorials around the world to remember those who died, and they collected things from the shipwreck to help keep the memory of the Titanic alive. The story of the Titanic is a sad reminder that humans are not always able to overcome the power of nature. People were too confident and thought the Titanic could never be destroyed, but the tragic ending proved them wrong. Because of this disaster, important rules were made to keep ships and people safe in the future. The legacy of the Titanic reminds us to be humble and understand that we have limits. It teaches us to be careful and appreciate how fragile life can be, even when we think we have achieved great things.